Welcome to another episode of Tales from the Bridge. Tade Thompson sat down with James, Kevin, and myself, and what a great guy to talk to. This will not be the only time we talk to Tade. He's going to be back on the show again because I feel like we didn't get to enough. There's so much more to talk about with Tade. Check out the show notes for links to his website and how you can get a hold of some of his work. We're reading Rosewater for the next book club. Join us for that one. All right, everyone's waiting for us. Let's make our way over to the bridge. Tade Thompson is the writer behind the Molly Southbourne series, the Rosewater novels, Making Wolf, and Far from the Light of Heaven. His work has earned major recognition, including the Arthur C. Clarke Award, the Namo Award, and he has also been shortlisted for honors such as the John W. Campbell, Locust, Shirley Jackson, and Hugo Awards. He was born in South London and is a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, with a professional background spanning medicine, psychiatry, and anthropology. So yes, he's probably the smartest person in the room. Tade, how are you doing?
Thank you. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I just have some letters after my name. So
Okay, we'll just say that.
it was so long ago, I can't remember any of it.
So you're a busy guy. What are you writing right now? Are you working more? What does your day look like?
My day looks like waking up, looking after a pair of kids who are, every day growing smarter than I am, and every day learning how to trick me more and succeeding. I go to a hospital. I work for 8 hours at a hospital. I come home. I goof off for about 3 hours, and then I write for about an hour. And that's it, really. That's my day.
That's a
what I
full
do,
day.
and yeah, it sounds simpler than it is. It sounds simpler than it is. I work in a very busy psychiatric unit. It's an acute unit, so it's people who are really, really unwell. And you never know what each day will bring. So it's busy, it's unexpected, it's tiring, it's emotionally draining. So when I finish with that, I have to do something that I have to have some kind of cleanse, like a kind of emotional cleanse. So that could be reading a book, it could be watching a TV show or a film, it could be painting something, just something that gets my mind out of that and then home, basically. And only then can I get into a state of mind to write something later.
So that emotional cleanse that you do to get you into the evening writing, do you find that to be enough that shifts you so that you're not in that negative headspace, or maybe does that inform your writing?
Everything informs the writing, I think. Everything we live informs the writing. I don't think we can separate anything from that. But whether it's enough or not is something that depends on the day I've had. So a successful day is I come home, I've not been assaulted on that day, nobody else got assaulted, everybody's safe, everybody's alive. That's a good day, and the cleanse kind of works. But if any of those things I just mentioned doesn't turn out that way, then it may not work as intended, and it may not work at all. That might be an off day, depending on how severe whatever happens is. It depends. And even a cleanse, it's a relative cleanse. You can never really, human beings, we are psychically sticky. So everybody you encounter in a day sticks to you in one way or the other. There is nothing you can really do to completely obliterate it, but you can create a distance, and that distance can make the rest of the day bearable.
I mean, that does affect your writing. Obviously, that's something you probably get asked all the time. What does the goofing off do to your writing? If it settles the mind, does that inspire new ideas? Like if it is watching a movie, is that like, oh, the trigger for what I might go into this evening?
So the way I do it is every Tuesday, and it is always Tuesday, I sit down and I sit down in silence and I think of ideas. That's all I do. I have limited myself to, like I must write 20 ideas. So I sit down and I don't get up until I've got 20 ideas. Now, they don't have to be good ideas, but they have to be new ideas. So they can be stupid ideas. They can be ideas for fragments. They can be ideas for poems. They can be a full-grown novel idea. but I have to have 20 new ideas by the time I get up. Um, of those 20, maybe one or two of them turn into full narratives. About half of them turn into things that support narratives. So if I have a short story and I want to add texture, some of those ideas can add texture to existing narratives so they can make them richer. Um, but I keep that separate from the actual writing of, whatever it is I write. Now the problem is, like, when you work where I work, uh, as you can imagine, being private is very important. Like, I have to have confidentiality, and the people that I work with have to be able to trust me that I'm not going to take their stories and write a novel out of them. So I really have to. It's a church and states thing. I have to keep it separate. It's one of the reasons why I tend to write science fiction or fantasy or crime, something that doesn't actually have anything to do with my day job, because if people think that you're going to write about them, then they're not going to open up to you, and that's just not good. Yeah. For a long time, I kept my writing life separate from my work life. The problem obviously is that you can't do that in the age of the internet, because even if, oh, here is your doctor, they will Google you immediately. So the reputation as a writer, it breached containment about, I think, 7 years ago. I remember the very day it happened, because I went to see a patient, not in the hospital I work, but in the general hospital, and he had bought a book of mine and said, "Well, I signed this for him." So I'm like, okay, right. It's the cat is out of the bag. So
Hmm.
so yeah. So whenever I do that kind of separation, it has to be separate, and I don't get ideas on the day that I am writing. I use the ideas that I've generated on one of my idea sessions. So unless it is a very powerful idea that I just can't ignore. But even if that happens, I just write the idea down. It's not what I use for the writing of the day.
I was actually going to ask you about that notion of, as you put it, church and state, because I would imagine in your line of work you come across um, patterns of thought and different expressions of being that maybe in most people's, the mainstream's sort of mundane day to day, we wouldn't come across. So was that a process for you to come to that, or did you know right away, like, no, I cannot go there. I cannot take from work.
I knew right away that, I mean, it's something that it's trained into you fairly early. You kind of know that, okay, you can't talk about the things you do. Even in the year, you know that from the years you're a student, you can't talk about it. The best story that I know comes from work, and the fact that I can't use it really, really, really irks me, because it's such a good story, and I can't use it, and I can't even distort it and use it. And I actually wish somebody else would write the story, but it's not. I don't, I can't use it. And it's been 20 years since the thing happened, and I can't use it. But it
Just
is,
just slip
it
it
is
over
by
here.
far,
Just send it in an email. We'll find someone.
it is by far the most interesting thing that I have ever been a part of. And I've never read anything like it in any kind of fiction. So I don't know. Maybe one day after I am dead, you'll be able to extract information from people's brains and someone else can write it. I don't know.
Creatively, I feel for you, but ethically, well done. Thank you for being one of the pillars of ethics left in the world.
Mhm.
You have to, the way the world is and the way the world is going, some people have to hold the line, because people are just kind of doing what they want these days, aren't they? So
Mhm.
we have to hold the line.
So let's talk about your work a little bit. As we were talking about before we started recording, we're reading Rosewater for the book of the month. But I'd love to skip back a little bit, only 3 months ago, to when The Apologists was published with Clark's World. Tell us about that.
So The Apologists, I've been thinking about it for a very long time. It's a novella, not a short story. I'd had that idea for a long time. In fact, I had actually written a part of that, or a form of it, in a short story, I think in 2016 or 2015, something like that. I, there was this thing on the news at the time, and there were these pandas who were, they bought this panda for a ton of money so that he would be a mate for the female panda that they had, and they hated each other, and they wouldn't mate basically. So I was thinking, okay, what if there was a human zoo and they had five people? One was an elderly couple. Um, one of them, one of them was gay, and two of them who weren't gay hated each other. So the aliens would have gathered them together to say, right, okay, we're trying to save humanity, and you five are the only ones left, so you have to breed. And they wouldn't breed, and the aliens could not understand how does this work and everything. So that was the origin of it. I was like, well, what if you had only five people left, and you know, they had to rebuild humanity from those five people. Of course, the problem is that there's a concept called the minimum viable population, and you need about 500 people to keep. You need about 500 individuals to keep the species alive. Like if the humanity were reduced to 300, we would probably just die. You know, so five was never going to work anyway. But that wasn't the conceit. The conceit was, what if there were only five people left and some aliens who didn't they were high tech but didn't understand humanity? What if they decided, I'm good, like, we're going to rebuild humanity. Your planet is in flames, but we'll rebuild humanity from you five. So I told that story from the perspective of one of the humans back in 2015 or whenever it is I wrote it. But the story it was always at the back of my mind. I just felt like I hadn't done justice to it. There was more to be told in that, like I just hadn't, like the idea wasn't finished yet. So what the aliens had done is they had rebuilt London, but populated it with androids. So what I thought is, okay, what if I tell this story from the perspective of the android? Which, sorry, spoiler if you haven't read it. Yeah, because big spoiler. Um, so I figured, okay, from the perspective of the androids that were in this zoo, this human zoo, how they would think they were human because that's what they're programmed to be. So they were programmed to be humans in this human world. And in this human world, there were five actual humans. But they were kind of just living. So one of the humans had started killing androids like a serial killer, but just killing androids. So I figured, okay, why is the human killing androids, and how would the androids respond to a serial killer? Of course, in the crowd, there would in amongst the androids there would be doctors and lawyers and and janitors, but also police people. So we're like, okay, fine. So what are the androids going to do? Someone is killing androids. How would they deal with it? And that was the origin of this story. So here's an android police officer, and these are the bodies of people being killed in a serial way. So she discovers a serial killer. In the story, you don't realize you're dealing with androids because the android would think they're human. So we start with what we think is a human murder, what we think is a human cop going after the murderer, and the murderer, who is actually human, seeming to have magical powers because he knows how to manipulate the zoo. So he eludes her, and she keeps trying to figure this thing out. And strange things keep happening that make her wonder, how is this happening? How is this person killing us? And at some point, I do a point that I put in my notes as the alien autopsy scene. They do an autopsy on an actual human being, which is alien to them because they're androids, but they don't know it. So when they see an actual human being and do the autopsy, it looks like a monster to them. So I play it like an alien autopsy, but it's really an autopsy of a human being, which is the first human being they've ever seen, but they don't realize it. And so those are the things that start to happen, and the whole thing then unravels like that. And then at some point, obviously, the android realizes that, oh, we are all androids, and these are the human beings. And that's, the apologists are actually the aliens, because the aliens, they destroyed the Earth by mistake. They didn't actually realize humans were sentient. They're that big, their ships were so big that they stripped off the atmosphere. They caused weather phenomenon that just wiped humanity out. So when they realized that, oh, these beings are actually sentient, they then started apologizing. And of course, the nature of their apology was really ridiculous. So, but that's why it's called the apologists. It's the aliens who are the apologists.
And I forgive me if this is a question you've been asked a lot recently, but that notion of what is human, especially in the sci-fi context, and compared to androids or replicants, or any of those, we've seen it a few times. I mean, Blade Runner is one of my favorites, and I remember a Black Mirror episode that touched on this as well. But in reality, in our quote unquote reality, we've never really been at a moment like this, where the notion of artificial intelligence has been so prevalent and discussed and feared. And I'm just curious if we can take a little detour from writing for a second to, I'm curious from your medical perspective and your familiarity with the mind and humans, what your take on that is are we looking at a future where AI will be sentient? And, I have my own feelings about that, but I'm curious as to yours.
My view is a little bit askew on this, and I'll tell you why. AI is the ultimate tool of capitalism. It is the apotheosis of capitalism. It is where it needs to go to. This is why lots of industrialists, lots of corporations are enamored of the thing, because finally they have the thing they want, which is we can make workers who don't need, who don't have workers' rights. We can finally do that, and then we can get rid of all these squishy human beings who say things like, oh, we need health benefits and we need, dental and, insurance, and oops, I injured myself, you need to look after me. And we're not going to do that. We're going to have robots and we're going to stuff our AI in them, and then we will be free of this nonsense. When it comes to humanity, because this is really the question here, what is human and so on and so forth, we already don't treat people who actually have human DNA as if they are people. We are locking people up in concentration camps. We query the humanity of trans people. We don't, we pick any minority and everything. We don't treat them like being fully human. Human is not, humanity is not available to everybody who is actually human. But no, we're going to spend our time putting billions of dollars into this technology to create an artificial human. That's what we're going to try to do. We're going to create an artificial mind when we haven't looked after the humans that we have. Especially from my point of view, as as an African, as a person of African descent, the whole thing looks ridiculous to me, except if I see it in the context, through the prism of, well, this is capitalism, so they just don't want human beings. So they want to create something that they can completely control. That's the whole thing. And so you got a bunch of people who are saying, about giving AI, AI agents and so on, giving them individuality and making them human. There are people already lobbying for that. When, I don't know, you don't even want to give COVID vaccine to my people. Like, I don't, this is smoke and mirrors. All right. This is them creating, and by them, I mean the people who are pushing AI, creating a kind of construct to distract us. It's going to be human. It's going to become sentient. That is science fiction. And I'm a science fiction writer, and I know that's nonsense. All right. I know it's nonsense. Apart from the fact that I looked into AI myself because of when I was writing Far From the Light of Heaven. I didn't want to write a novel that depended on tropes of science fiction, because you can sit down, and if you've read enough science fiction, you can probably write a good facsimile of a science fiction novel by just saying, okay, I'll take this trope and faster than light travel and so on and so forth. You could do that. What I wanted to do, like my own primary research, well, not primary because I'm not doing the research myself, but I wanted to actually read what existed about AI and all of that. Because prior to doing that research, prior to writing that book, I thought, yeah, if they keep working on this thing, there will be artificial general intelligence pretty soon. When I did the study, I realized that no, there's not going to be artificial general intelligence anytime soon. But that's what they sell to the public, the idea that, look, it can do this now. Imagine what it can do in 6 months. And then when it's 6 months, imagine what we'll do in 6 months. And it's not going to happen. Like, there's several reasons why it's not going to happen, but that doesn't matter because people invest emotionally. So they invest. I don't. By that, I don't mean that they invest emotions in the thing. They invest their money emotionally. So they have this fear of losing out. I'm talking about people with money to invest in it. Therefore, they pump money in it because everybody's doing it. Therefore, they have to. This is a mirage. This is people just wanting to get funding and therefore saying, "Oh my God, there need to be rules because this thing is going to become sentient." That is, pardon me, but that's bullshit. It's not becoming sentient. It's not, we're not close to artificial general intelligence. That this is not, this is just smoke and mirrors. This is because we interact with Chat GPT and it seems to be talking back at us. So the way people try to distinguish between alive and not alive, it's not very complicated. This thing is reflecting back on us signs of being alive, but it's not alive. And the idea of whether they have souls or sentience or intelligence is bullshit. It's junk science. It's junk science. But I do recognize that these kinds of discussions need to get into the public domain because people need to understand that just because it can mimic I think it was 2 weeks ago, one of these AI shields was saying how either Claude or something was showing signs of anxiety. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. I remember, I think at the time, I think I did a post on Blue Sky saying that, look, in order to be anxious, you have to be self-aware. You need an amygdala and you need an autonomic nervous system, which your Claude does not have and cannot have. But what it can do is use the same terms that a human being would use if a human being were anxious. That doesn't mean it's anxious. That just means it can copy language. That's what, this is nonsense. But it's serious nonsense because at least 2/3 of the world appear to be enamored of it. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, and I think you're right. I mean, there is a funny, not funny at all actually, but an interesting way that this potentially incredible tool is being fronted as something else, and there's the fear element that's coming in on all these different angles of like, we're going to take your job, we're going to take your humanity, we're going to so it's and yet then on the flip side I've heard those reports of, and you've probably seen it in your day job as well, of people developing psychological attachments to these models and these machines. So I'm curious as to your thought on that too.
Okay. There's so much in what you've just said. So the idea of the wireframe mother. So there's psychological experiments done where I think they used a primate of some kind. They used a monkey or some kind of ape, and they had a wireframe, and then they had the wireframe covered with a blanket. And the idea was to find out which one did the monkey prefer, and if the wireframe mother could provide that kind of nurturing that the monkey required, the monkey would go to it, and it did. And it was literally a wireframe, and it was at some point that there was a blanket over it. There's more to the experiment than this, but my point is that there are certain things you can mimic that can get an empathic response from that, from an organism, from an organism, like let's just say from a higher organism, from a primate. You can mimic enough, even when the thing itself is literally just twisted bits of wire. If it provides warmth to you and you can go there and get your food from it, then you will start to have emotional responses to it. It is not unusual at all that human beings form attachments to AI, to AI constructs. It's not unusual at all. They use really brilliant psychologists to construct how we interact with these things in such a way that we will get emotional responses. And I'm pretty sure you're all aware of the recent judgments against Meta, and about the teen who said, well, I think the idea was that the teen was blaming them for the social media addiction and the subsequent mental health problems that developed from that. So like the actual development itself is very old science. It goes back more than 100 years. Psychologists know how to make you care for things. And I use things deliberately. They know how to make that happen. They know how to keep you interested in your TV screen. This is it's not revolutionary. This is not new science. This is always been the case. It's not hard. It really isn't hard to do. So I'm not surprised at that. It happens and it will continue to happen. It's almost within the design of the thing. It's kind of baked in. So that is not surprising that it happens. We're not It's interesting, like there's a concept, and I don't know if people still use that concept. This concept of the good enough mother. And the idea is that you don't actually have to be a perfect mother for a child to love you. You just have to meet certain criteria, which is great it's great for humanity, but particularly for women who think I'm not a perfect mother and get anxious about it. Well, you don't have to be. You just have to be good enough for the child to develop, in a satisfactory way. So like they can strip it down to the bare minimum of what is required to form a link between human and machine, and it does form. And that's not necessarily it's not necessarily a bad thing, because all of us, we come into this world with different kinds of gifts. Some people find it extremely difficult forming relationships with other people. They find it very, very difficult. It's very anxiety provoking. It's not something that we should take for granted just because we have been able, for example, to form relationships with other human beings. Not everybody can do that. And there need to be options for such people. There need to be situations where they're comfortable. And some people are more comfortable within that. Here is a construct. It's not going to judge me. I'm comfortable here. And finally, I get some kind of acceptance. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is something that does work for people. The problem obviously is that human beings are complex. We are complex. So we don't always do what we say we're going to do. We don't always act according to what our principles are. We disagree sometimes. Sometimes we're completely irrational. This is what makes complex human beings. This is what makes us human. The fact that, okay, you could write code for all of us, and then the next day we will come in and do something completely different. So we're not predictable, and for some of us, that's why we love our partners, because we can't tell what's going to happen. And this is a good thing, but it's part of what makes us human. And the idea of a construct that always agrees with you, as we know now, is dangerous. Because it may be part of why you get AI psychosis. It may be part of why people who are given advice by AI, and some of them kill themselves. It's not people disagreeing with you is a good thing. All right. It is a good thing to be disagreed with. It often doesn't feel comfortable, but it's good for people to disagree with you, because sometimes what it means is, let me rethink this. Sometimes what it means is, am I sure of this? Let me just go check. Oh, yeah, yes, I am sure. So this person is wrong. But it helps to refine you. So disagreement is good. If you have a tool that doesn't disagree with you, then it's a really dark path.
To leave that for a second and go back to the notion of complex humans, though, one complex human is your protagonist, Caro, in Rosewater. And I will confess that Rosewater is my first book of yours that I've read. I really enjoyed this book. It was fresh and original.
Thank you.
But Caro is different. He is not your typical, hero. He in fact, there were moments of verging on the anti-hero, if I can use that term as well too. And how did you come about into forming his character?
Well, first I'm going to say is that I don't like traditional heroes. Caro comes out of my idea of what a hero should be. And I think that often the people that we end up thinking are heroic are actually just people who happen to do the right thing in the moment. I don't think these people did the right thing every day of their lives until all of a sudden the spotlight is on them, and you happen to be the one who has to decide, right, the Germans are coming and we will not bow down. We will fight them on the beaches and so on. Their lives up until that point may not have necessarily been heroic, but they do a heroic thing. Some circumstances collude to make them do the heroic thing. That's what I believe. I think that heroes have to be more complicated. I think that, yes, you can give heroes all the accolades that you want, but something made them do it at the moment. And we will all be grateful, for example, for the person who was looking at the radar screen and he's been told these are nuclear missiles, and just thinks, no, these are not missiles, and I'm not, like we are all grateful for that because essentially that could have been the end of the world if he had said, fine, we're gonna fire back, we're gonna fire back into what is really a flock of geese. That could have led to something catastrophic for all of us, and we're all happy about that and all that. But like, it's not, like heroes are, in my opinion, made by the moment and by the choices they make in the moment the heroic thing happens. Um, So I didn't want your typical I'm a good guy and something bad is happening, therefore I must fight the bad thing that is happening. I wanted a guy who was actually the opposite of that. I wanted someone who was like, look, I am self-interested. I don't care about any of you. If I could run away, I would. And he actually does run away sometimes. It's just that he's forced back into it. It's like, like I have superpowers. Let's go and fight crime. No, I have superpowers. I'm going to go steal money. That's it seemed a more honest evaluation of what because a person will think of self-interest, even if they do something heroic, but people are not going to be like Peter Parker or Clark Kent on every day of their lives. They're not. They're going to be, some days we'll make our good choices, and some days we're going to make less good choices. Personally, find it very hard to believe that Peter Parker, for example, given how broke he is half of the time, would not one day be tempted to like, you know what? I don't have any money. And how many times have I saved this city and saved, how many times have I captured bank robbers and everything like that? How have they given me anything? Like, can't I just take a little bit? Like, there will be days when Peter Parker will think, I'm not Spider-Man today. I'm just going to not be Spider-Man and look after myself, and not have to live in one of the most expensive cities in the world with an employer who hates me, or at least who acts like he hates me, an aunt who needs my help half the time, my supermodel wife, because we don't subscribe to One More Day. So like I said, no, this is going to be somebody complicated. Now, as to how I formed the actual character, about half of him comes from an actual criminal that I met. So some point when I was in university, at some point there was a strike of the custodial staff. And what the administration decided to do was to go to the local prison and get a bunch of prisoners to come and help out and clean up the environment and all of that. So what we would do at the time was we would buy them beers. Whenever they came, we'd say, "Oh, you're out of prison. Here, have some beers and everything." So we would kind of sit down and we kind of got talking. So there was this guy, and he basically just told me his life. Part of his life story is directly in the film. I'm sorry, in the book. There was a time when Caro tried to steal something, and there was a mob chasing him, and he kind of ran into a rubbish dump, and then kind of aquaplaned in the rubbish dump to the bottom and everything. That actually happened to this guy. He said he stole something, and then they caught him, and then he ran, and then they ran after him, and he had to go into a rubbish dump, just like that. It was
Okay,
there.
okay. Of all of the things in the book that you could have told me was based on an actual true life story, that particular passage from the book is perhaps the most horrific. I think.
Yeah,
But
yeah, he had a terrible life. He had a terrible, terrible life. Um,
wow.
but it was very upcoming. He just told me the whole thing. Like, look, when you've been in prison and then you're allowed out and someone has given you a beer and you're sitting down, I mean, people talk. It's, so, and it was very interesting. So literally half of him is based on that guy. The other half is based on my younger brother. But I'm not going to tell you which parts are from my younger brother. But, you know, and that's really how I formed him. The ideas for the book were already there, and I had a few false starts, but I just couldn't get a character who would, I needed a character who would take us through that world in a compelling way. And I could not figure out whose story this was in the beginning and everything. But after, once I kind of formed Kara, I just realized that, yeah, this is it. This is the person. And I knew exactly how his life would show us Rosewater. Because really, when I wrote the first book, I just wanted to show this city and show everything and show the what I call a slow invasion or a slow apocalypse. Like, yes, there are aliens, but we don't know about it, or we do know about it, but we're pretending we don't know about it, and we just kind of carry on our lives, and that's really how the character came about.
Well, honestly, just on what you were talking about with Rosewater, I hearing about your Tuesdays, your idea Tuesdays. When I was reading through Rosewater, I kept, nodding my head, saying, "Oh, now that's a really original idea." The Xenosphere, the slow apocalypse that you mentioned. You mentioned before that you're trying to avoid tropes. I mean, this series, the Wormwood series, seems to do exactly that to me in a fairly original way. Were you must have been specifically trying to be quite original with a lot of your ideas here. Did those come out of your Tuesday ideation sessions?
They did, but not in the same way. So at the time I wrote Rosewater, I hadn't systematized it as much as it is now. So when I wrote Rosewater, I hadn't delegated it to Tuesdays. I hadn't so now I actually have like a notebook, like, this is the current notebook. Um I now have a notebook where I just Tuesdays open it, sit down, lock the door, and start coming up with ideas until I can no longer come up with anything until I reach 20. At that time, it was more, oh, I have ideas. Okay, I'll sit down and write ideas. Like it was more scattershot than what I'm doing now. I would just write them down. I already have, because I already have a journal practice going back many years. So I would just write them down. So they would be in my journal, but scattered amongst other things. So I would have to go back and flick through. Wait, hang on. I have an idea about wrestling. And you'll know wrestling came into Rosewater. Towards the end of the book, wrestling actually comes into it as well. So like, hang on, I had an idea about wrestling. Where is this thing? And then I would then flick through my journals trying to remember where it was. Um, and so it was more scattershot at that time. Now it's small. I know exactly where to find everything because I now have just books for just ideas. That's that's the main difference.
Mhm.
Um, as a person who's read a lot of science fiction books, I knew what the tropes were. So I knew what tropes I wanted to avoid and which ones I wanted to just reconfigure slightly and ones that I wanted to break.
It sounds like and you probably have a very good memory too. Like I'm just thinking about The Apologists. You said that you originally wrote that story, I think, in 2015,
Yes.
and so coming back and forth and modifying and drawing in new knowledge to it. Honestly, I would just forget. I would forget my ideas. So it's a
Well,
nice
there's a
process.
thing we said that there's a thing like if you can forget it, it wasn't a good idea. It wasn't a good enough idea anyway. I think there's a saying. Somebody said that I don't remember who it was, but one of the, in the writing advice someone gave, it was more like, well, like don't agonize over the ideas you can't remember because if they were that good, you would not be able to forget them is kind of what I would think. And also like somehow I believe that we can tell when an idea hasn't reached its conclusion yet, when there's more, like even if you write a story or a book out of an idea, there will be that nagging feeling of hang on, but there should be more to this. Like, and that's the feeling I had. I felt like I haven't finished this idea, even though I've written the story. Like normally when I write a story and I finished it, and when I've done all the revisions and everything, I can't stand it anymore because I've read it like, I don't know, 200 times and I'm like, enough, I don't want to read this again. And that's it, it's dead. I don't want, it's dead, Jim. I don't want to even hear about it anymore. But this one didn't end. It's more like there's more to this. There's a perspective you haven't looked at here, and it kept nagging me, but I didn't know what perspective I was lacking. So I just kind of left it there at the back of my head. And finally, it kind of came back and it's like, okay, look, here's what's happening. Are the androids human? Is a very good question. And or do they think they're human? Because obviously the Blade Runner aspect is there. Like, what do the androids think? What do the replicants think of themselves and all of that? But so that obviously is in the DNA of this, is unavoidable. It's in the DNA of it. But my idea was that, okay, look, what if that all of the androids, what if all the replicants were the same in believing they were human, and then there were some humans mixed in? So instead of having a human world with some replicants, I had a replicant world with some humans, and then kind of took it from there. And really, for me, it was, what really set me going was actually the alien autopsy thing, because I'm like, okay, well, what if the androids and their doctors or pathologists come across a human corpse? What would they make of that? And of course, there are echoes of, the thing and, all those circumstances where there are aliens who have taken over human bodies, there's body snatchers, so it was more like here's the alien autopsy, but it's humans. And that really was the moment I realized, okay, I have to write this novella. And that's kind of how it came out.
Yeah, well, I really enjoyed Rosewater, and I'm excited to read the rest of the Wormwood series. And anyway, let's move on to some of your more recent stuff. Tristan, did you have something you wanted to talk about?
Well, I'm a bit of a Doctor Who nerd, and I think there's a lot of listeners out there that are. So I think your latest novel was a Doctor Who. Can you just give us a little taste of that?
I am a Doctor Who fan, but I'm very much a Tom Baker. I'm more of a Tom Baker, like I really loved his incarnation of the Doctor. Um, but I also realized that often how he treated, you know, Sarah Jane, was of its time. I also, I also kind of looked at that and I just figured, okay, it's not the first time that I kind of was approached. I've been approached over the years to do a Doctor Who, and they've never allowed me to do what I wanted to do. The BBC is very strict about what you can or can't do with Doctor Who and the lore. There are keepers of the flame, right? There are people who you can't just do what you like. Um, and so whenever they kind of came up to me, I would always say something like, okay, well, I want to do something with Tom Baker. And I always thought, don't you want to do something with, oh, the 12th Doctor? I said, no, no, no. I want the fourth Doctor. Like I have a particular story that I wanted to tell and everything. So we finally were able to come to some kind of agreement. Like, okay, fine, you can write Tom Baker's Doctor, and what do you want to do? I said, good. I want to set it in 1976. And they're like, can we make it vaguely the 70s? I said no. I said it has to be 1976 because I don't know about you all because some of you are young. I don't know if you're younger than me, but 1976, there was a heat wave in 1976, unlike any other. It was hot. There was no water from the pipes. We had to have standpipes constructed outside, and we had to go outside and get water in the summer of 76. It was a massively hot summer. Um, and I just felt like, okay, but what if it was aliens? You know, you know, and really, I just I wanted to approach Sarah Jane, I wanted to approach the companion from a different direction and have some difficult conversations about what it means to be a companion, what it sometimes means, and to also kind of reach into the alienness of the Doctor, because like the thing about Doctor Who is he's a Time Lord, he's not human. And I wanted to make it really obvious that, look, he's like a human, but he is not. And what that means is that it's interesting. We're back to that theme of humanness, but what it means is that some of the things that we take for granted, he will not. And you can see it when you watch it. There's some things he just finds interesting while they're terrifying for humans on the show. And he's just like, oh, that's interesting. No, it's not interesting. It's frightening. Like it's really, really frightening. And I wanted to lean into some of the Doctor's alienness and at the same time him trying to be human, and I wanted to create some kind of moment where Sarah Jane and the Doctor do not agree because Sarah is human and the Doctor is not. That was the key thing I wanted to do. And like, yes, he doesn't mean us harm, but he is still not human. That for me that's one of the core things about the Doctor being him being quirky. His quirkiness is not because he's like a human being quirky, it's because he's an actual alien, and that's what I wanted to lean into, and I did get to tell the story I wanted to tell. I'm very proud of it.
And the keepers of the Doctor Who lore were okay. They didn't push back.
So so here's the thing, like I I asked questions that apparently nobody had asked before because I had to describe. So the time tunnel or the time corridor that the TARDIS comes through. So I then described while I was talking about it, like, so the TARDIS was traveling through the time corridor with bolts of static jumping from the TARDIS to the wall, right? They didn't like the wall. That word that I used, wall. I said, why? He said, because it's not a wall. I said, well, what is it then? He said, well, it's a vortex. I said, yes, we know it's a vortex, and some people call it a time corridor and everything, but vortices have walls. So do corridors. I said, okay, so what do we call the thing that balances the vortex? This took weeks.
So I need to find out more about these lore people. Do they have a job title? Is this like Doctor Who lore specialist?
So I had an editor for this is a novel and here is your editor. And then I had a lore person, which was separate, who had their own, their own opinions on what I was doing. It's like, well, you can't do that, and you can't do that, and you can't do that, and you should do this. And here's where your timeline is off. And you get to understand why they want you to vaguely say it was the 70s rather than a specific time. But I'm like, no, this is 1976, because it had to be 76 and all of that. But apparently, and I don't know, apparently nobody had described it as a wall before. And I had to get a physics article describing vortices that says that, look, it is a wall. The thing that encircles a vortex is the wall of the vortex. In the end, I think they let me use it, but it's interesting because it's part of the process of writing Doctor Who, where people are very careful what they do. They don't want to, yes, you can be inventive, but there's a kind of boundary around your inventiveness, and new words make them twitchy.
Well, Tade, I'm mindful of our time, but before we sign off, I do have to take you to task a little bit for something previously. I didn't want to interrupt, but I do think that you severely underestimated the role of Uncle Ben's lessons in Peter Parker's life, and there's no way that with Uncle Ben's modeling, Peter would be anything less than altruistic. So that's my feeling on that. And I have to say, but I will say, and maybe I'll give this one to you, because I will admit that I read an interview in the back of the edition of Rosewater that I had that said that your an early career ambition of yours was to be Spider-Man. Is that true?
Yes. When I was 5 years old, I literally prayed to God that I would be Spider-Man. I literally did pray this. I'm not kidding with you. It's just it's the wall crawling. It's the spider sense. It's like, look, Spider-Man is such an awesome character, and the weakness and the strength make it together, and the fact that he's often underestimated because of how skinny he looks, but in actual fact, he's a lot stronger than he looks. And so this, we could have a whole podcast on Spider-Man. But I do think that it goes back to what I said about humanity and heroes. The fact that circumstances can make you a hero, circumstances can also make you a bad guy on that day. It doesn't mean this is what you're going to be, but we can all have bad days. It can happen to all of us. It can happen to all of us. That's what I'm going to say. And it doesn't actually matter what your parental figure, Uncle Ben, has drummed into you. It doesn't matter, because he's not there when you're cold and starving and have no heating and still have to get up and go and do the heroic thing, which Peter has to do a lot of the time. And he has to use his hands to sew up his costume and go to the laundrette and try to clean his spider costume while nobody else is, and they look at him, it's like, no, it's a costume and all of that. So nobody suspects that's what it is. But he has nothing in his bank account. And he's cold and he's hungry, and Sandman has just almost broken his jaw for the 14th time. You cannot tell me that he is in such a place that Uncle Ben's teachings are not distant to him at that moment, because that's what happens to human beings. Sometimes your moral self is distant from you. That's what happens.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Thank you, Tade. That was awesome. We'll be doing it again sometime soon. Lots more to come from Tales from the Bridge. Until next time.